Hello and welcome back to the KCC channel. I'm Rob and I hope you are having a wonderful day today. Today we're jumping into some malicious compliance. Before we start, if you're new here, make sure to hit that subscribe button. It's completely free and you can always change your mind later. But if you stay, I might just send you some cookies. Alright, our first story today comes to us from ZaneTheRaptor. Doing my job. Let's jump right in. Okay, I am really quite terrible at recounts, so I will try to keep this quite brief. Basically, I was working casually for a pizza chain, the one that you can't out pizza, and I had to call out for a shift to go to the hospital as I was the victim of some domestic issue and injured my arm. The managers were fine with it, although out of the 4 I spoke to, none of them asked if I was okay, but that's a different matter. I went to the hospital and the doctor looked at it and just put a band-aid over the wounds on my arm and said not to do any heavy lifting and use my arm as little as possible for a couple of days. I questioned whether he could just glue the wound or stitch it, but he refused. I have no idea why. It 100% needed to be glued, and my regular doctor said as much, the same when I showed the injuries to him nearly 2 weeks later, as they still hadn't healed. But after I got to my house from the hospital, I rang my store manager and told him I would only be able to do light duties for a couple of weeks, knowing the doctor at the hospital was wrong, and he said that was not a problem and that he appreciated that I was still willing to work. Anyways, I went back to work 2 days after the injuries occurred. Yeah, I probably shouldn't have been going to work, but I needed money and wasn't going to have any otherwise. As soon as I got there, the manager, not the store manager, let's call them Tammy, told me I would be on dispatch, cutting and boxing all the pizzas and sides. I apologized and explained I wouldn't be able to do that, as the pans can get quite heavy, and the doctor had asked me not to use that arm. I also showed her the bandage I had wrapped my arm in. Tammy asked why I even came to work then, and I explained that I had told the store manager about my circumstances, and they had been happy for me to do light duties. Tammy rolled her eyes and told me to answer the phones and serve customers instead, which I was happy to do. We got quite busy and dishes started piling up, and Tammy told me to get on wash up. I reminded her of my arm and suggested it probably wasn't a good idea to put a fresh wound that was still bleeding slightly in water that was being used to clean dishes. Tammy rolled her eyes and said she was going to the office and she would be back in 20 minutes, and that I had better have all the dishes done and put them away. I tried to explain that I wouldn't be able to lift the fresh out of the oven pans into the sink to wash, but she ignored me and said my arm couldn't be that bad, or the doctor would have glued the wound or given me stitches, and that she wanted the work done. Cue the malicious compliance. I started doing the dishes and was very careful to only lift an amount that I could handle with one hand, despite it not being very safe. 10 minutes later, Tammy yelled out that I wasn't moving fast enough and that I needed to use 2 hands, so I lifted up a larger pile that I could usually carry quite easily with 2 hands, but in this case, my arm went numb and I dropped them and in reflex tried to catch them, which completely busted the wounds open and blood started dripping everywhere. I quickly bandaged my arm again and cleaned up the blood, but one of the customers had started yelling that I needed help. Tammy came and told me to move out of her way. She then spent the rest of the night cleaning the dishes as the store manager had checked the cameras and seen me doing the dishes and told her they needed to be redone with clean water. And I continued doing the light duties I'd been assigned, aside from a number of admin tasks that I normally did, which she for some reason refused to allow me to do. I found out later Tammy didn't go home until 1 a.m. and kept 2 other staff there to help her when we closed at 10 because she wasn't able to get her work, plus the work she refused to let me do, done on time. Sorry if this is poorly written or doesn't sound like the typical malicious compliance. I promise it was. I'm just really bad at recounts. Now, I do want to mention that right at the beginning of the story, OP mentioned that they went to the hospital because of a domestic issue. They were asked in the comments down below if they were okay and in a safe place now, and they responded that yes, it was a bit of a journey, but they are safe now. Going back to the part about the store manager here, I know they were okay with OP coming in to do light duties, even if the manager that was on duty wasn't, but you'd think that the store manager would have brought on another person at that time, scheduled another person to be there as well. knowing that OP wasn't going to be able to fully do their job. So it seems to me like there was a bit of an issue as far as the management is concerned, where they weren't prepared for this issue with OP, even though OP gave them plenty of notice. But also, Tammy spent her time in the office and didn't really come out and help either, so maybe the store manager was thinking that Tammy would pick up the slack. I guess they were wrong. Our next story today comes to us from Wild Butterscotch 977. Oh, my paper isn't long enough? Okay, let's jump right in. Another post reminded me of my own little bit of malicious compliance back in college. This was more than a decade ago. So in my junior year, I was taking an art history class on medieval art and architecture. Partway through the course, the professor assigned a paper, and the instructions were that the paper length was to be 5 to 9 pages. I wrote my paper and it ended up being 5 pages. I said everything I felt was necessary to say in that amount of pages. When I got the paper back, I received an A-. Now, I'm not usually the type to complain about an A-, but in this case, I knew I wrote a strong paper. I was an art history major, and at this point was 3 years into my program. So I had a buttload of art history classes under my belt, and I effing knew when I produced a good art history paper. So I really wanted to hear why I got the minus instead of a straight A. I went to the professor's office hours to ask why he graded it as such. Yes, he was quite amused someone was complaining about an A-. I didn't give an F. I wanted to know why he took off points and what he thought could have been improved. He hemmed and hawed for a few minutes because there wasn't anything wrong with my paper, and finally he said, well, it could have been longer. I said, the prompt said 5 to 9 pages, and I was within that range. He replied, it could have been longer. Okay, fine. Next paper that came around was the term research paper, and this time the prompt said at least 15 pages. Cue malicious compliance. I worked my butt off writing this research paper, and out of pure spite, I made this dude read no less than 29 effing pages about some stupid medieval church. Now, I had written papers this long before, and a year later when I wrote my honors thesis, it was nearly 4 times that length. But for this particular topic, I was really stretching it. The verbosity was a bit ridiculous. A week or 2 later, he returned the paper A+ grade. He handed to me and said with a genuine smile, it was great, I loved it. You should submit it for publication to a history journal. I begrudgingly submitted my maliciously compliant paper to the journal, and it was accepted and published. Admittedly, I was probably the one that suffered the most from my own malicious compliance, but I didn't care, and I'd do it again. Wow, malicious compliance that turns into a publishing credit that you can put on your CV? That worked out in your favor. This story actually reminds me of way back when I first met my wife. We were both working in a call center, and she was the quality lead who was sitting with me for a call. I didn't like selling on the phone, and she kept pushing to me that I needed to sell to this customer. So I very sarcastically decided to mention it to the customer, and they bought it. So yeah. This next story comes to us from Bubbly Kitty 2425. My dad's cousin's ex. Let's jump right in. I was told this would be good here. Let me tell you a story. My dad's cousin, she's in her late 70s, early 80s. Well, she was married to a super high up of some big company. They had 2 kids, but had a wonderful prenup, and it was ironclad. Where if they got divorced, she got nothing but what was acquired during marriage, and he paid child support. If she cheated, she forfeits everything but child support. If he cheated, he had to pay her alimony and child support until she got remarried. No matter what she made, it was set that she got $5,000 a month alimony. After the kids were 18, her alimony went down to $2,500 if she still was unmarried. The man was loaded. Well, he cheated and she got proof. Actually, his boss caught him and liked her, so he told her, even testified to it. Plus, he didn't deny it in court. He was having an affair with his young secretary. So she got alimony and child support. Well, years later, after she finished cosmetology school, she ended up opening her own hair salon in the South. She has a lot of customers in those upscaled assisted living facilities, so now she's also loaded. She drives a super cute red convertible Mercedes. Well, they divorced when she was 30. She still has never remarried. He's still paying alimony. She has a serious boyfriend for 30 years, but she said just to spite the ex, she will not remarry unless he dies. So he has been married 4 more times, but no matter what, because of his prenup, he insisted on, she still gets that $2,500 a month. Well, for at least 40 to 45 years so far, he's been paying. She said after what he did to her, making her give up her dreams and sign a prenup, she was going to make him pay. She did eventually go finish school and follow her dreams after the kids were grown. She's the nicest person too. His other wives got nowhere near that. He made sure his prenup granted them nothing but child support. Also, her boyfriend and her don't live together, they have been neighbors for years. They both want their own space. He also has his own money. She doesn't even need her ex's money and just puts it in an account for her grandkids' colleges. She also likes to donate some to a women's shelter. She donates it in his name, so he gets notifications or notes that money was donated in his name. She says the day he dies, she and her boyfriend will go to the courthouse. Everyone in the family knows, and every time we see her, my father laughs and says, "So the ex still alive and paying?" Wait a minute. If that's a registered charity and she's making the donations in his name, isn't he able to claim a receipt for those and then have it taken off of his taxes? I mean, I'm pretty sure that's how it works where I live, but I'm not sure about where OP lives. If that's the case, OP might want to think about stopping doing that because they're not actually hurting him. They're actually helping him out, because some of that money that he has to give her on a monthly basis, he's just able to write it off on his taxes. Our next story today comes to us from Diligent Cockroach 700. No pass, no entry. Let's jump right in. This happened quite a few years ago. I started a new job in IT support. After a couple of weeks training and orientation, I was put on my first early shift. IT support were always the first in the building to make sure all the systems were good before the working day started. So I was given my own key to the front door to unlock the building. The entrance had a kind of airlock system. The outer door was unlocked, but then there was another automatic door that needed a swipe card to open it. Everything was fine for the first few days, entered the building, got on with my work. Then, this particular morning, as I unlocked the door, the head of HR walked up behind me. I recognized him as he had sat in on my job interview. I said, "Good morning," swiped my card, and walked in. He followed me. As soon as we were in the building, he pulled me up and told me I shouldn't have let him in without him swiping his pass. His argument was that he might have been fired the day before, so might have been trespassing. The swipe card system was not used to monitor people's work hours or anything like that. I apologized profusely, and he said he'd let it go this time as I was new. Fast forward 2 weeks, I'm unlocking the door and a complete stranger walks up behind me and tried to follow me in. I turn around and ask him to use his pass. He says he has forgotten it. I say then I can't let you in. Then he drops the bombshell, "But I'm the CEO." I apologize and say sorry, I only have your word for that, and I'm under strict instructions from the head of HR not to let anybody in without a pass, on pain of disciplinary action. He got quite angry and said again he was the CEO. Later that day, I got a phone call from the head of HR. I thought he was going to bullock me, but instead, he said that I did the right thing and he was going to get the CEO to apologize to me. I did get a short email from the CEO to that effect later in the day. Yeah, OP, even if you knew who the CEO was and you'd been working there for a very long time, I think you could have gotten yourself in some deep doo-doo by letting them into the building. Your HR person was completely right in saying that, well, you don't know if they got fired the day before or not, and you could be letting in somebody who's coming in to make a big fuss or damage things or people, who knows. I mean, that CEO could have even been in cahoots with the HR person, and it could have been a test for you anyway, so that's another thing you gotta think about. This next story comes to us from Hooked on, adult phone stuff, yeah. Micromanaging 101. Let's jump right in. I am an amused bystander to this. I was working on a compliance project at the time. The practice had once consisted of a single compliance officer, but the company had grown and responsibilities had been split up into multiple departments. The The person who had once run the entire practice alone was having a hard time handing off responsibilities to the newly created departments and would find petty ways to claw back control at any time. This person would also panic about investigations that could prove that previous work had not been done consistently, so would revise procedures, definitions, department requirements, etc. to suit whatever agenda happened to be at play. Sometimes this meant ignoring important things. Sometimes this meant filing unnecessary reports. Things changed on a weekly basis. For some unfathomable reason, this person was very concerned about in-person coverage. The entire department had worked remotely throughout COVID. All other departments continued to work remotely. This department had to be in the office, period. To make things worse, working hours were defined as 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. with a 1-hour break. On multiple occasions, this person would complain, claiming someone had mentioned that the department was deserted before 5 p.m. on Fridays, the day before holidays, etc. Didn't matter that staff was working around 60 hours. Also didn't matter that there was nobody there to complain, as this was the only department on site. There were duties which occasionally required someone to be on call until 6 or 7 p.m. On-call staffers suggested that the person responsible could start late on those days, but no, the workday starts at 8 a.m., no exceptions. The 2 hourly staffers took 2 to 3 hour lunch breaks so that they could still cover the required 8 a.m. start date, be available until 7 p.m., and still meet their no overtime requirements. The salary exempt staff wasn't having any of it though. Calls were no longer answered because staff was to work from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., and there was to be no flexibility regarding attendance. Staff got tired of this and mutually agreed to give this person exactly what they asked for. They started sending group texts of their work lock screens showing that they were at their desks at 8 a.m. They'd send texts showing that their computers had been locked at 5:01 p.m. I was briefly on this text chain and had to mute it due to the barrage of daily petty texts. The individual in question intended to mean that staff had to be there at least between those hours. Unpaid OT was totally reasonable, but there was to be no concession made to allow staff some flexibility in the way they split up their working hours. That couldn't be said for obvious reasons, so they harped on the 5 p.m. minimum end to workdays. As you can imagine, this was followed by a wave of resignations. Over a 6-month period, the department collapsed, leaving them with less staff than they had before the expansion. Great for us. We ended up winning a lucrative contract to manage and rebuild their entire practice. The staffer responsible for this great resignation was found to be incompetent after their work started to get reviewed independently. The sheer volume of missed issues became impossible to justify, and this person was eventually quietly replaced. A lot of companies over the course of COVID were forced to have their employees work from home, and then they realized, wow, we can actually do this and maybe save some money by not needing all the lights on in this big building we have to house all these people. But then there's always the ones that are stuck in the old times, and they don't think that anybody could work from home and be productive, that we all need to be stuck in one place together so we can all be watched over closely. Yeah. Times are changing, bud. Get with it. Check out all 5 OPs linked in the description down below. I thank you for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day, and we'll see you tomorrow.